I'm fascinated by human behavior, and I'm fascinated by it in the sense of, what sparks us to do good things? What sparks us to do bad things? A student had asked me, well, how did you change your brain? Because I used to really hate math and science. Don't be like confused by the fact that, oh, technology is coming out with all these great new ideas and different approaches and different. Just remember that you need to understand the fundamentals yourself. Some of my friends are individuals who were never trained in computer science, have no computer science degree, and they are superstars in programming. You have to realize that the brain has two major pathways that it uses for learning. Empathy is a double-edged sword. It is not always a good thing. Critical thinking isn't always about convincing other people. It's sometimes about changing yourself, convincing yourself, and being open to, oh, I was wrong here.
So, Dr. Barbara, thank you very much for being here with us. So, you are one of the world's leading experts on the science of learning. You have multiple best-selling books. Under your belt, you also have the highest-rated MOOC in the Coursera, and where I just checked today, yeah, we have got like more than 3.5 million students enrolled in that course, and I am also one of those 3.5 million individuals. So, being a person with ADHD, I have immensely benefited from your course, and the benefit was not limited to like my academic life. I also benefited on a personal level, on a professional level, and the most important thing is that I could share some of those learnings with many other people. So I'm really glad to have you today. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here. Actually, when you look at it, it's 3.5 million on the current platform, but on all the language platforms plus the previous platforms, it's like 5 million students. So more than that. So it shocks me, but at the same time, it doesn't shock me because people are fascinated. They know that learning is really important in their lives, especially nowadays where things are flying at you. There's change everywhere. Now it's Chat GPT and so forth. We need to learn about all these new ideas. But but the great thing is that neuroscience is giving us solid practical insights that we've never really had before. We didn't really, we said, oh, you need to get a good sleep, but we didn't know why. You need to retrieve ideas from your own brain if you're going to learn them, but we didn't know why. So, sometimes we knew what we should do, and sometimes we didn't even know what we should do in order to learn more effectively. But now neuroscience is helping propel everyone, I think, on a very solid path towards being able to learn more effectively. And what's so cool is that there's like a few simple little tricks that can really help you to enhance your productivity and your ability to learn.
So right now you wear multiple hats, and I presume your current focus is the focus is on the complex relationship between neuroscience and social behavior. So being an expert on the science of learning, I wanted to understand like what sparked your passion for exploring how we learn and how we can do it better. So what is the reason that drive you?
I'm fascinated by human behavior, and I'm fascinated by it in the sense of, um, what sparks us to do good things? What sparks us to do bad things? Why can we sometimes do bad things and think we're doing good things? And I was examining all of these kinds of ideas. I ended up writing, co-editing a book called Pathological Altruism by Oxford University Press. And then I gave a talk for the National Academy of Sciences, published a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences about sort of good intentions that have bad results, called pathological altruism. And I've been working around this area for several years, and I just got really tired of thinking about bad aspects of people, or ways that we can go wrong and fool ourselves in our thinking. And so I thought, you know, I've got this idea. A student had asked me, well, how did you change your brain? Because I used to really hate math and science when I was growing up. I just, loathed math in particular and flunked my way through elementary, middle, and high school math and science. And this engineering student of mine found out about my sordid past as a math flunky and said, how did you change your brain? And I have changed my brain quite a lot. I did it in my late 20s, basically by slowly working my way upwards and beginning to learn more about math, which I had always thought I couldn't do before. But the more you learn and become successful at something, the more you can end up liking it. And so, of course, now I'm a distinguished professor of engineering, and obviously I love math and science. Um, but I thought, how did that happen? I mean, that student sparked a really good question. And so I wrote a book, A Mind for Numbers, about how does one make a switch, especially as an adult, to become someone who is good at technological kinds of things, even if you didn't think you could do that kind of thing before. And this book, to my total shock, I mean, there's nothing more boring for a book title than to be named A Mind for Numbers. When Penguin picked that book title, I thought, oh well, this book is dead on arrival. But it sold over 1 million copies around the world, and it's a very, very popular book because I think it gives you solid ideas coming from science about, well, how do you change your brain, especially because we as adults often need to change our brain to learn more effectively, or we may have thought we couldn't do math or science, or learn programming, for example. So in a way, I had been working in this area of pathological altruism, and I thought, well, why don't I switch to something more positive, and that would be education and how we learn effectively, especially since I see now that people really love this book and these ideas about learning. Little did I know that actually knowing about pathologies of altruism is very helpful in understanding some of the pernicious trends in education. There's often like very well-meaning ideas about how we learn effectively that are dead wrong, but um, but educators put them forth anyway because they've said them all their lives and they think it should work. But like all learning should always be fun. Well, I'm sorry, but if you are a concert pianist and you're practicing, some of it is fun, but some of it is you really it's a very, very demanding skill. And it's like that for anything you're learning. Sometimes it's fun, sometimes it's a very demanding sort of thing that you're doing. And anyway, so I explored all of these ideas and how can we make learning easier for us. And I mean, if I'd known then, back in the day when I was trying to change my brain to become better at math and science, if I'd known then what I know now about learning, I could have saved myself so much time and made things just a lot easier. And so these are the kinds of ideas I like to share about now. And I think these are the kinds of ideas that you have learned about that have been very helpful for you as well.
Yeah, yeah. These kind of like these are there are very interesting things that I have come across. Like from the very beginning of my childhood, what I've learned. I have to highlight the books, I have to reread the rote memorization. So if I have to do a math properly, I have to go by the step by step process, repeat that step. So eventually that math will get internalized by. So these are the few of the fundamentals that being inculcated from the childhood. But when I came across your book, I say, okay, there is a concept called active recall. There's a concept called like spaced repetition. There's a concept called diffuse mode and focus mode. So I was just fascinated to know, okay, how could I not know all this stuff? And I went into my professional life, and now I am learning. So yeah, but I am grateful that at least I came across this at the very early stage of my professional career. Otherwise, probably it would have been ruined since I had to wear multiple hats throughout my journey. So this kind of learning, I would say, structure was very important for me.
Absolutely. It is funny, even learning something simple like that when you are focusing on something, in some sense, that's like putting your brain in a lockbox and it's not allowing it to get away from what you're focusing on so that if you get stuck, you can tackle it from a different angle. And this idea of you are in focus mode, which means technically you are activating the task positive networks. You need to, it, that's great. That's part of learning. You need to do that. But when you get stuck, you want to push into getting stuck and then, so try to really get it, get a little frustrated, but then let it go. Step away from that box of focus and let your brain do something completely different. So, you know, have dinner, have chat with friends, go for a little bit of a walk, do something to get your mind completely off it. Because as long as you're focusing even the littlest bit still on that problem, you can't release your brain to sort of range widely so that when you do return to your focus, it can begin to make sense. So a lot of times I think people just they don't know that it's okay to let go and let their brain work in the background and then return to it. They just think, oh, if I can't get it right away, I must be stupid. And that's not true.
So I was like commenting on the young people that, yeah, I remember. So yeah, when I come across a lot of young people, like they have the same kind of misconception. Like, okay, I am not able to learn this stuff within, let's say, this many days or this many months. I must have been a stupid person because this is all my fault. But when I discuss this kind of ideas of getting into diffuse mode and focus mode, yeah, I always avoid the jargons because it probably scare them off. And what I try to say that, hey, let's imagine you're going to a shower. Don't you have amazing ideas when you go to shower? What is the reason? Because you step back, took a step back from the black box, and now you are open into the wide imagination. So this is something that really resonate with them, and I believe this kind of idea should be like a common thing when we probably these ideas should be part of our school curriculum. Hey, this is the way how you learn, this is the way how you practice things. So yeah, but at the same time what we are seeing is that technology is transforming, I would say, at an unprecedented rate. The era we are living in is quite interesting. We are seeing the open AI. There are like huge developments in multiple fronts. Someone is saying that the developments should be paused for few months so that it doesn't cross the human. So it's like human talent. The existence of human is challenged. Like, yeah, you must have seen those articles and everything. But what I strongly believe is that the learning, our capacity to learn, our capacity to connect, and our capacity to develop habits, these are few of the things that make us really unique. So I wanted to understand what are the most effective learning habits that enable us to adapt and grow in different situations. Let's say, no matter what, today we are having ChatGPT 4, probably tomorrow 5 and 6. But what are those effective learning habits that will make us human thrive regardless of the situation?
Hmm. So, first off, we have to remember, I mean, when calculators came out during the 1970s, all of a sudden educators started saying, oh, well, you don't need to remember the multiplication tables or really understand how to do things, in that you can just plug things in your calculator and it will figure things out for you. And what happened, at least in Western countries, when they did this, was that people began to really struggle with understanding math. So, for example, I just spoke recently in Finland, and Finland is supposed to be the top country in the world for educating students, and yet the professors in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, who I met with, were saying, these students here, they just can't get math very easily. And a lot of the professors were from countries like Bangladesh, where actually some appreciation for the old traditional rote methods of learning are still in place. So, the thing is that when, um, well, the I guess that when we're learning today, we can't forget that the brain still needs to be learning. And so, in that sense, we still need to get those fundamentals ourselves if we're to understand things. So, don't be like confused by the fact that, oh, technology is coming out with all these great new ideas and different approaches and different. Just remember that you need to understand the fundamentals yourself. And if we took, for example, a engineer from the 1950s and transported them into today, they would still probably learn more easily than someone who hadn't learned the fundamentals of learning in science, learning in engineering. Then someone, yeah, it's amazing. If you get the fundamentals of how you learn effectively, it can make an enormous difference in how well you do. But don't be fooled. Don't think, oh, I don't have a background in math, or I don't have a background in programming, so I can't get into programming. Actually, if you go and you try to begin learning in that area, you will learn how to learn more effectively. And you can actually be more creative and better at what you're doing than someone who's gone through the traditional programming, and gotten a computer science degree. Some of my friends are individuals who were never trained in computer science, have no computer science degree. They just taught themselves or went through boot camps and learned how to program in that way. And they are superstars in programming. So don't let your mind trick yourself and say, oh, yeah, I don't have a solid foundation in, you know, whatever this skill or discipline is, because you can acquire it, and you can actually acquire it better if you're just focusing in on it yourself rather than going through a classical, um, you know, getting a computer science degree over 4 years at a university.
Oh, yeah, that's quite interesting because and quite reassuring as well because uh, we work with a wide variety of youth coming from different economic backgrounds and coming from like different walks of life. And when I'm saying youth, I'm referring to an age group of 18 to 35, and people coming from this kind of age bracket has different challenges and different thought process. Like those people who are into the fourth year of their university, they are afraid to their core. They are thinking, oh man, everything is being taken care of, technology is taking care of everything, accounting is being taken care of, finance has been taken care of. So what would I do in my career? Like they are dead depressed. And there's another group of people who were saying, hey, technology can take anything. We are solid. So let us do as it was, and we don't have to change the status quo. So these are two extremes, but in between there are growth. Let me give you a persona or an avatar for you to understand better. Let's say I'm a person who is around 32 years of 32 years old, and I'm stuck in my career, and I want to switch my career. I want to switch my career. Let's say I'm from a non-technical background, but I want to gradually switch to a technical background, and I want to take up a very, I'll say, senior role. So, what would be your advice if I want to start this journey and I have, let's say, 2 years for me? In next 2 years, I want to ensure I have a very successful transition. So, how should I start and how should I prepare for this kind of transition?
So the lucky thing is that nowadays there are so many courses online and you can learn really well through these courses. In fact, I should say that there's a man named Julius Yigo who he was from Kenya and he always wanted to learn to throw the javelin, but there were no javelin throwing coaches in all of Kenya, and he couldn't afford to go overseas and study, so he started watching YouTube videos with great instruction on throwing the javelin. And then he would watch a video, go out and practice, watch, practice. And in that way, he became the world champion in throwing the javelin. So the moral of this story is that there is great instruction online. Seek it out and then seek out opportunities for you to practice actively with what you're learning. And you can do virtually the impossible by focusing in on this way and teaching yourself using good teachers. The thing is that you have to be a little careful with saying, okay, I'm going to become a brilliant, um, you know, programmer in 2 years, or giving yourself this strict time limit. Everybody's different. What you want to do is you want to figure out how much time do I have available in a day to help change myself, and then try to make best use of those hours. If you are somehow able to work full time all the time on this new learning, great. You can make a lot more rapid headway than someone who doesn't have that time. So, just be aware that, I mean, it's the amount of time that you put in and the amount of effort you're able to devote to really pushing yourself to do the hard stuff during that time that you do have available that is going to determine how quickly you can transition and how reasonable it is to hold certain goals in mind. So everybody's a little different that way, but I think the big thing is, um, well, a major thing is what is called retrieval practice. And retrieval practice means whatever you're learning, don't fool yourself by looking at something and thinking that it is in your long term memory, because it probably is not. I'm a leading expert in learning, and I am just amazed sometimes at how I'll be looking at something, I'm reading that. Okay, I got it. I really I know I have it, but I only have it in temporary working memory, not in long-term memory. And the only way I can check to distinguish the difference, it feels exactly the same if I have it in short term or in long term memory. But the only way I can really know whether it's in long term memory is to put down what I've learned and see if I can retrieve it from my own mind. So it's this kind of retrieval practice, and that's harder It's a lot harder if you go, okay, yeah, I see this equation, I know how to use it, as opposed to what was that equation? Now, can I remember a problem that I'm working on with this equation? This kind of thing. So, pushing yourself by doing the hardest stuff will make the best use of your time when you are changing yourself and and learning new things.
Okay, so if I like put it into layman's terms of like for understanding, for my understanding, for others people understanding, so I have to first determine that how much time I am available. This is very important. Like it. Uh, it might be misleading saying that I have 10 days available, right? Because in a day probably I have only 2 hours. In a day probably I can devote 8 hours. So it is very important to figure out how many hours I can actually devote. Then pick up the best materials, and most importantly ensure that I am actively practicing through retrieval, and I am challenging myself without fooling that okay, this is something. Recognizing a material and retrieving a material is a two different ball game, and I'm constantly differentiating between these two. So these are the like top three things that you would suggest, right?
Exactly right. And when you are learning something, it's very important. Let's say you do have 8 hours in a day. Don't sit there and go, I'm going to study for 8 hours. I'm just going to that way lies madness. You want to make use of that diffuse mode. So the best way to do that is using something called the Pomodoro technique. And that was invented by an Italian, Francesco Cedillo, in the 1980s. And this technique just says, set it, get rid of all distractions. So no pop-ups on your computer, nothing on your cell phone. Then just you want to set a timer for 25 minutes. And after you've gotten rid of all these distractions and set the timer for 25 minutes, focus as effectively as you can for those 25 minutes. When your mind goes, oh, I'm going to check the internet or something like that, just say, nope, anybody can focus for 25 minutes. And then when you're done, 5 minutes of a relaxing break that does not involve anything that is focused. So that means make a cup of tea or walk around a little bit or just do something or take a shower, take a nap, take something. Um, Oftentimes, what people like to do is they do four of these pomodoros. So they do three pomodoros followed by a 5 minute break on each one, and then the fourth they have a half an hour break. So there's all sorts of good apps for the Pomodoro technique, or to do pomodoros and allow you to sort of add up and keep count of how many pomodoros you've done. But and it's not like this is hard and fast. Like if you feel that you want to do a 30-minute Pomodoro or a 50-minute Pomodoro, that's okay. But just be aware that if you go too long, your mind will become tired. And without that little break, you can't get this refreshing look back at what you've done and kind of consolidate it and help make it sort of more effectively put in place in your long-term memory. So those little breaks built in can be very, very helpful when you are studying for longer periods.
Yeah, and like sometimes what I have seen that we push ourselves to studying for so many hours, and that is like a badge of honor. Like you will see in YouTube's how to study 14 hours a day, how to study 18 hours a day, and these are like different badge of honors. And I sometimes wonder, and my first questions is that are you a human being, and why? Because people get misled by this kind of information, because we are trying to be superhuman to some extent while forgetting the fundamentals, that these are the very precious fundamentals that we need to adhere to if we want to have some kind of progress. This is very important. But I have a one controversial question that I just wanted to take the opportunity to ask you, is that Many people have said that these kind of techniques, retrieval and the other techniques that we discuss, active, like studying for all the stuff, these work for the hard skills. But if we want to develop soft skills, let's say I want to develop skills in negotiation. Let's say I want to develop skills in sales. How do I apply the same principles in developing different soft skills?
So you have to realize that the brain has two major pathways that it uses for learning. So when you're learning facts or uh, kind of information, you're using a declarative pathway through the hippocampus, right? Or that makes use of the hippocampus. When you are practicing with something, you are often using this procedural basal ganglia learning pathway. So, like, you can read how to, um, you know, solve a particular problem, say, involving binomial distribution using a certain methodology, and you can practice with it. When you're practicing, the more you practice, the more you begin using these basal ganglia habitual pathways. Now, when you are learning how to interact with other people with soft skills, a lot of times it is using this experiential procedural pathway that helps you learn to detect patterns and kind of understand how to do things. But the only way you can really, really learn well using this pathway is by doing it a lot. There's no like, okay, I mean, you can give a few principles about interacting with others, but then it goes to practice, practice, practice. So in some sense, learning about learning can help you because you can understand in these sort of soft skill situations that are more amorphous. It's actually practice that's what's going to get you there, so that you're really comfortable with and you know what you're doing. And you might say, well, I want to speed it up. Well, it's the same pathway that a concert pianist uses when they are practicing over and over again. You can't speed up your procedural learning. You can just get more practice with it. So for this kind of soft skills, practice, practice, practice is the key.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, yeah, there's no shortcut. So we have to do the hard thing. We have to get out of our comfort zone. And while getting out of our comfort zone, we have seen that recent emergence of technology and artificial intelligence are pushing, to some extent, pushing ourselves to be stuck in the comfort zone. Hey, we are doing your work, so that you can take rest. But if we reflect deeply, we will see that there are a lot of things going in the background that aren't that kind of comfortable, to be honest. Like, let's say for technology, in many cases, have penetrated our social life in a way that we don't have that kind of social life anymore. Probably, me and my wife is both are sitting in the same room. But we are existing in a manner that we are not even in the same room. We are chatting with different people. So, and with more technology getting into our life, I I was wondering, like, how do you think that technology affects our ability to connect, socialize, and create empathy with other human being, with other fellow human being, and treat us like a human? That is very the point that I'm trying to get across is that how can we use technology to be more human? So, what do you think?
Well, I have to step back for a moment and say that you had mentioned, how can we learn to be more empathetic for others, to others? But actually, you don't necessarily want that. Empathy is something that often tricksters and fraudsters will use in order to defraud you, in order to, they'll get you to empathize with them. Or you can get bullies will, they take advantage of the fact that you want them to like you. And so they hurt you because they know that they can, because you care about how they feel, right? So, in other words, what I'm really saying is empathy is a double edged sword. It is not always a good thing. And we don't want to be teaching people, oh, you just need to be more, the world needs to be more empathetic. Because what happens is the, some people who are already empathetic will become more empathetic. And that actually, and the ones who aren't empathetic, they're going to just not become more empathetic. They'll just be able to more effectively manipulate those who would be empathetic. But how, let's take when writing first originated with cuneiform back in the day in Babylon, people would say, "Oh no, there's you're learning to write. It's going to destroy your ability to remember from your own mind. So writing is a really, really bad thing." And I mean, there's some truth to it. We don't need to have to remember all these things if we are writing things down. Every single technology has good and bad aspects. And, and what we're seeing now is schools, at least in some Western countries, are beginning to realize that social media is actually kind of a infectious and a pernicious thing, especially for young people who can be very deeply affected by empathy and seeing the bad things other people write about them and so forth. So there's a step back in some Western countries, an increasing movement that perhaps young people should not be allowed access to some of these technologies. So I think that we the technology is evolving. We are watching its effects on us, and we are evolving in how we interact with it. There'll be good and bad things coming up in the future in regard. I mean, right now, what happens oftentimes is um, the loudest voice, the one who complains the most, is the one that everybody listens to, and that shuts down the conversation sometimes. So I think things will be sorting themselves out probably for the next hundreds of years. Uh, who knows, maybe from then on, because we're still sorting out the good and bad aspects of being able to read and write. So, but that's the nature of the evolving human nature, and it's going to be interesting to see what will come.
Yeah, yeah, interesting things are unfolding. So let's say you were a career advisor. Let's say I'm giving you a hat of a career advisor, and you were advising a person who is 24 years old. What would be your top three pick in terms of skills? Like these are the top three skills you as a young person should have. So what would you suggest, regardless of the background and everything? They might be from engineering background, they may be from business background. Doesn't matter.
So, of course, I'm naturally going to say that learning how to learn is one of the top skills to have. Um, but I also think that a solid foundation in math, and knowing how to use math is very helpful. So, I mean, you can't run a highly functional society if most of the individuals just don't even have a rudimentary understanding of math. And what this means is that politicians can come up and they can promise you the moon with with ideas that are completely unworkable and magical production of funds from nowhere. And if you don't have a math, a kind of a background in math and a little bit of understanding of science, you can be easily hoodwinked by these promises that really are actually not in accordance with facts and not in accordance with reality. So I think having a good math background is also important. And then lastly, just ha- being able to speak more than one language, I think is very helpful as well. Just because, and in your area, your neck of the woods in the world, people often speak more than one language. So you've really got a leg up on I think, good ways for understanding life in general.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that is encouraging. So yeah, yeah. The second point is I'm really astonished to that you mentioned that the math is skills. So just to clarify for my audience is that when you are referring to the math, obviously you are not referring to the calculus and all those stuff. You are referring to the fundamental math that we require on a day-to-day basis, right?
Exactly right. So I'm talking about things like, what are the multiplication tables? How do you do fractions? How do you do simple algebra? It's been shown that those who can simply understand the math behind how a mortgage for a house works. So it's like, if you control for everything, it's just this person knows how to calculate the mortgage on a house, and this person doesn't understand mortgages on a house. The person who understands that math is far less likely to default on that mortgage. So, in other words, understanding the math can give you foundational ideas for, like, let's say you're trying to start a business or you're trying to run your household with wise control of the budget. Just having a rudimentary understanding of the important facets of math will really help with that.
I'm really glad that this came up organically because we work with a lot of young entrepreneurs, and what we see that unfortunately majority of them lack the financial literacy. Like they don't have to understand all the calculus and everything. They had to do basic business math, but majority of them struggle doing all the stuff, and this directly impacts their bottom line. Like let's say they're doing business very well, they're putting their heart and soul everything in the business, but due to that bit of financial lack of financial literacy, that tiny bit of understanding of math could have saved them all the trouble that they go through on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, thanks a lot for mentioning that. So you wear a lot of hats, researcher, uh, writer, speaker. So what are you up to right now? What is your next goal that you are
Oh,
trying to work
I have so many things going on. It's just a little bit crazy. So right now, I'm working with a professor in Poland and creating a new massive open online course on critical thinking. And it's sort of the neuroscience that underlies critical thinking as well as critical thinking itself. So, how do you run a business and think more critically about different kinds of ways that your business can go wrong, and how critical thinking plays out in everyday life? How can you understand, like, another person's argument and see what's right with it, what's wrong with it? How do you change your own mind if you need to? A lot of times, critical thinking people are like, well, you need to, you know, have this idea in order to strengthen your argument and convince other people. But actually, critical thinking isn't always about convincing other people. It's sometimes about changing yourself, convincing yourself, and being open to, oh, I was wrong here. So anyway, I'm working on this critical thinking course, and we're scripting it now. We hope to film maybe by the end of the summer. I'll be going to Guatemala and working there for through most of September. And I'm working on several different journal papers, three different ones that I've got in mind, and I'm working on, so it's like too many things, but they're all really exciting. So it's a fun time.
Okay, so despite all the stuff that you were saying that is exciting, Abby. So yeah, I'm really glad to know that you were working on the critical thinking stuff because like if you ask a lot of people the what are the most important skills, the critical thinking comes up. But if we dig deep, what is critical thinking? Okay, that's you convince some people and you have got a set of critical thinking abilities. So I'm really glad that you are working on this, and I'm super excited that amazing stuff will come out. So this is the last question. I know you're super busy. So this is the last question is that what will be your parting thoughts for our young audience who is struggling to decide on their career, who is struggling, I also about the transition, or who is struggling to take the next big move, take that leap of faith?
If you are feeling really uncomfortable, like you're a fake, you're not sure you can do it, welcome to the club. That's how I've felt through the years. Every single change is always like, oh, can I do this? This is crazy. I don't have the background. I can't do this. And yet, if you just persist despite feeling uncomfortable, in other words, learn to grow comfortable with feeling uncomfortable, you will actually do better, because the cocky people who feel very comfortable, uh, they tend not to do as well, because they don't have that impetus to change themselves, because they already think they're right. So if you feel uncomfortable, you're unsure, you feel like a fake, it's a good thing. You can still do it. Just remember that we told you that.
So it's like being comfortable with the uncomfortable stuff.
Bingo. Exactly right.
So yeah, with that, it was an amazing conversation. I got to learn quite a lot. I had a lot of questions that I use this platform to clarify those questions. And lastly, I'd say I know you were working on the critical thing stuff and multiple stuff. Just let me know if I can be of any kind of contribution, because this is something that's close to my heart. That this is a personal story, and this won't go into the online stuff and the online world. In my last job, I was reading a paper that is on metacognition, like thinking about thinking. My boss just picked over and asked that, "Hey, what are you going through?" I said, "Boss, it's about learning about learning." He asked me, "Don't you have any better stuff to do in your life? Just go there and manage projects. What are you doing?" So but still, I have got that paper that is like six page long or something, and that relates to all the stuff that been mentioned in your books, and probably in your recent book, the metacognition. You have also mentioned the metacognition, but I saw in the course. So yeah, so I would love to like volunteer in any of your work that's related to this thinking, neuroscience. Although none of these are my expertise, but I really love to volunteer. Please let me know if I can be of any kind of help.
Well, I will definitely do so. And right now, I'm just trying to kind of get it all grappled into my mind. And it's a little tough, because I'm learning ideas of logic and critical thinking, even as I'm also trying to assimilate what neuroscience is saying about these things. And sometimes it doesn't say anything, but you have to look a lot to find out, that they don't say anything. But then sometimes when you do find the insight that they lend, it takes quite a while for me to grasp. what they are saying and make it so that it gives insight that's practically useful for other people. So it's a hard part of doing what I'm doing, but but I will just keep forging forward. And if I see something that you could lend a hand with, I will definitely let you know.
So yeah, sure. Thank you, Professor. Thank you for your time. I'm really grateful to you. So hopefully we catch up soon on a different occasion.
Okay. Well, sounds good. And thank you so much again for the invitation to share.
Okay. So thank you. Take care. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye bye.